Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by writer Rick DeStefanis. He is very interesting. This will be good. He was a military veteran and former paratrooper who was with the 82nd Airborne Division from 1970 to 1972, and he has gotten really into writing about the Vietnam War. One wonders why. He was at the scene of the situation. And so, from his first book, Tallahatchie, to the latest ones, he's won a ton of awards. 2015 Readers Award for the Gomorrah Principle, all this sort of thing. He's just won all the awards, Military Writers Society of America Gold Medal Award. He's collected all the metal, all the hardware that you would want to have. And so we're going to dive into more about his career, how he got into writing, his books, all this type of thing. There are so many of them. I think I'm counting here at least a dozen. So we're going to get into all of them, find out about his whole journey, find out about his books, and go from there. So welcome, Rick, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you, Cameron. Appreciate it.
Yes. So, well, let's dive in right at the beginning. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself and your writing?
Well, first of all, a little correction. I get some real hard stares whenever I say this to a group of veterans, but when I completed airborne training at Fort Benning, we had a tight-knit group of 5 of us that had gone through Tiger Ridge at Fort Polk for infantry training and all this. We were very close. We all received orders for Vietnam, the 101st, the 173rd, some of them, and one of them was Special Forces. But long and short of the thing was they came in after they issued our orders that night and took up orders and changed them. Of all my friends, our group, I was the only one who had his orders changed, and they were changed to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the 82nd Airborne. And being 18 years old at the time and pretty stupid, I was very disappointed. But yeah, so
But not for very long once you got to the scene, though.
I spent a year at Bragg, and those guys began returning. Matter of fact, the first one I saw was every morning you get up at Bragg 5 days a week, and you fall in a formation and you run. Combat boots, fatigue pants, T-shirt. 3 miles, Ardennes Boulevard. Everyone who's in the 82nd did it. And that's the first thing you do. Well, one morning, a year later, I'm going up Ardennes in our formation, running, doing what Army people do, chanting, whatever. And this guy starts screaming, D, D, and I'm like, who the hell? I look over, it's one of my friends. He's back. And we actually broke formation and sat there and embraced right in the middle of the street with all the little second lieutenants going nuts. And eventually we all hooked up. And we rode motorcycles up and down the East Coast, everywhere from as far down as old Jacksonville, Florida, all the way up into New York State, Pennsylvania, up in there. And we would stay wherever we landed at night. And these guys, after a few beers or a bourbon or two, it's the only time they would ever talk. And I was around them in a lot of places, in a lot of situations, with a lot of people asking questions, and they would never say a word. But after a few drinks, with just us there around a campfire usually, they would talk. And it really hit home for me, because when you see a guy 19 years old, who's hard as a paratrooper is, come to tears or have to just stop talking and get up and walk away, you found something. And these guys would talk about their experiences. Well, I still didn't realize I was a writer, but I started taking notes, or actually writing them down when they didn't know I was writing them down. And we stayed in touch, and I asked later if I could write their stories as nonfiction stories. And they, to a man, said no. They didn't want to relive it. And in later years, I went back to school, and the professor, one of the professors there, said I should write. Said it was, I had a talent, which I said, okay, great. And I had a subject, so I did. And I started writing it as fiction. Most of my fiction stories are based on actual events that happened to these guys. We had one guy got tied up with real nutty guy. He was in the special operations group, but he was kind of a freelancer. He wasn't military. He was Office of the Special Assistant, is what they call it now, CIA. And
Mm.
that's where the Gomorrah Principle initiated from.
Oh.
And he told some pretty crazy stories. And others were like, one of them was in the 75th Rangers. He was alert the whole time. And he told some pretty scary stories. And the one thing that used to really shake me up and shake him up, he couldn't hardly talk about, was the time they, when they were alert team and they're normally on their last day in the field, if it was convenient, they set up an ambush. And they did. And they caught a group of Viet Cong coming out of a village off the coast, coming back up into the mountains. And they sprang their ambush and very successfully almost wiped out the whole group of 14 or 15 Viet Cong. Well, they got down there to search the bodies. They found about 10 of those 15 were unarmed, young women carrying nursing medical supplies. And he never got over it. He never got over that. And that's one, you'll see these stories in my books, or parts of these stories in the books.
No, I was laughing when you were, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was laughing when you were talking about getting these guys talking. I have a lot of military in my family. Um, and my grandma's fifth husband, husband number five, was a sniper in Korea. He was at that Yalu River disaster. And he, one, when he died and was buried, he didn't want military nothing. I mean, nothing. Not even a flag. Nothing. Strict instructions. And we followed them. I was there, I know. But he would never, ever really talk about any of that until he was at least a case and a half of beer in. Like, it was like there's a couple snippets on like Sunday at beer 25 for about a half hour of lucidity. You'd get a good solid like tight 20 minutes about that situation. And so I was laughing when you said that because like I know that very very well, but I also was really touched. He had never really been to Washington D.C. and I went several times in high school and I did a whole photographic tour of the Korean War Memorial and he was still alive at the time and I went back to Arkansas where he lived and showed him the pictures. And I've never watched a grown man who worked construction his whole life, grew up six children in the Depression in Arkansas before they had power and electricity because the TVA hadn't been built yet, and all this. I mean, this man was just very, very tough as nails, dude, sort of thing. Literally break down and say, "Oh my God, they remembered us." Yeah, Ken, they did. There's a more people visit. It's in granite. It's in Washington. Yes, yes, yes. They've built the whole thing. And he was like, oh wow, they remembered us, sort of thing. And it was just so touched by it. He didn't even go. He just saw the pictures of that I had gone. So yes, I was just laughing all the time. All the relatability and that relating for some reason I don't know why, but for some reason men in the military love to tell me about weird or terrible things that they have done. I don't know why, but they do. Flying is terrible because I'm just kind of like, okay, we have 4 hours to get to Los Angeles. Tell me everything. And
Oh,
it's and I just the things that you've heard, but that feeling, not to dwell on that, but to get to your point of the never getting over certain things. And especially for some of my generation of people my age who were Iraq and Afghanistan, for them, I was always shocked by not even the horrors they did, the horrors that they saw the locals doing that was just beyond everything. And it was it's always been quite shocking. And I have this short story I want to finish writing called My Tin Soldier Boys, where I write about all these stories that I've heard as the years have gone by and along the way, sort of thing. And so there was just so much of what you just said that I would just touched me in a very deep way and reminded me of a million different conversations with dozens of different people. And it's amazing that you've taken your experiences from your time and your friends and put them into something the rest of us can read and get together with. So that's, and I think that's absolutely amazing. And I think a very important narrative shift about Vietnam. Talk about a war with a muddy narrative.
That's a tough one.
Well, I don't mean talk about it as in you need to pontificate. I'm just saying that war has a muddy narrative, and I feel like maybe you're doing your own part to rehab it in its older years.
Well, one thing I guess what I would say about it is these stories that many of there's two types of stories I've read put out by other authors. The nonfiction,
Yes.
O'Brien, Caputo were the two of the best.
Mm-hmm.
But the average guy writing his Vietnam memoirs, and a lot of them are officers and whatnot, when you read them, they almost read like an after action report or a newspaper report.
Yes.
It's nonfiction, and they whether consciously or unconsciously avoid the deep psychological questions and thoughts and feelings that are so involved with something like that. On the other hand, the guys that I'm reading that are writing the fiction stories are writing war stories. Period. End of subject. And I actually had at one time an interest with an agent who had gained the interest of a major publishing house in New York. And after they read the manuscript and got back with her, essentially they wanted me to gut half the book about the female protagonist, her thing was she was going off to Nashville to try to become a country music singer. But my whole thought on this thing is no one goes to war by themselves. They've got families. They've got wives, sisters, brothers, mothers, and those people suffer along with them. And so every book I write about Vietnam has a strong secondary protagonist. Some of them are Vietnamese. Some of them are nurses. Some of them are just a person back home. And that was important to me. And then actually my Vietnam series is divided into two different series now. During the war and post-war. Three of them, Birdhouse Man, Rayford's MVP, and Miss Molly's Final Mission are stories that mostly take place after the fact. Like Birdhouse Man, actually much of the Vietnam experience is told in there, but it's by a old veteran who's a professor. And Rayford's MVP, the first 6 chapters take place in Vietnam. But the remainder of the entire book is this guy dealing with post-traumatic stress. And as many of the veterans tell me, not sure what I can say here, but I laughed my butt off. How's that? Yeah. Reading this, he said, I never thought I would, but I saw myself in it. And so Rayford's and Miss Molly's is just a love story, basically. It's about a former pilot in Vietnam who goes to Central America and tries to rescue some missionaries that are trapped in a mountain village. Anyway, the others actually take place. Gomorrah, Melody Hill, Valley of the Purple Hearts. Those are in the what I call the Heart of the Soldier Combat in Vietnam, I think is the name of the series. Those are actual, take you from the beginning to, and all of them do include some post-war. The soldiers don't just come home and go away like they do in probably 98% of every war story, fiction war story you read out there now.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm a big, what I'm saying is a believer in focusing on the entire experience, not just, okay, we were in a battle and we really shot up the world. No, That's not the way the soldier even thinks. He's thinking about home half the time. He's thinking about that girl somewhere, whether it's in Vietnam or whether she's a nurse or whether she's at home, wherever. And then after the war, like I said, they don't just go away.
No, I mean, I think, and we know this from history back to antiquity. Um, Nothing changes a society faster than conflict, even if you don't lose. If you end up with a draw where nothing really happened, nothing really moved, or you end up, winning, it still has a profound change on society. And I mean, sometimes we know it because it was so large, like World War One. You don't kill 5 million people without having a major effect on society, and it did. Um, Economically, socially, everything. And there are some people for whom, that's going to be the significant thing of their life, and through injury or something else, they're going to need to be cared for and looked after for a very long time thereafter. Um, and then there are still others who come back and, join the workforce and build a business or build a career or whatever have you. And sometimes I feel like they maybe need some looking after too, because they look fine but aren't, maybe not always.
That's
Um,
that is so true. They compartmentalize. I have at least one. I know I have several friends who have gone all through their lives, and they were in the thick of it. Look, everything was great for them. They went through life, got into their later years, in their 60s normally. And all of a sudden, it hits them like a hammer. I had one guy, two of them this way, and both of them saw a lot of. One was a Marine, and one was a Army officer, and both of them in later years. Matter of fact, one was a former boss that I had when I was working at FedEx, and he was a well thought of, high level executive management, and you would have never. The only way I knew it was his box in his office with about 10,000 medals. I said, my God. And just cool, level-headed. And even he later told me, he said, never had a problem until I got in my 60s. And same thing with the Marine, 2 Purple Hearts. He came back. He was a union representative in Detroit, or in Michigan, for a long time. And then he owned a gunsmithing and a sporting goods shop, and said he never had a problem. Got into his 60s, it hit him like a hammer.
yeah, and that's yes, and so I mean, but yeah, we do always kind of feel like this is, and I even see it now as we especially with our more recent conflicts, because they were so long. I mean, I about died of laughter one time when someone remarked we were in Afghanistan for so long that a young man's father had been at the same base that his son was now also serving, because we had been there for so many years. Which I thought was, absolutely hilarious. And I think people, hilarious, but dark comedy. And that, yeah, yes, hilarious, but in a dark comedy way. And that, and all the ways in which, even though the military represents only 1% of our population, these people are around. I used to work at a fashion magazine. One of our photographers was on the bomb squad in Iraq and has been blown up more times, I think, than any human being should. And it is a little giant beekeeper suit. And sort of the trauma of, driving along and blowing up, and his job was to try to stop that from happening, and all this sort of thing. A very difficult things. There are some really good books about Iraq and Afghanistan, and I am looking forward in 20 years about getting some more. And so I want to return to you and your own process, because everything you're saying just reminds me of so many things. Anyway, back to process. You are very prolific. I'm impressed. You're very prolific. How do you crank it out? How do you get out so much material?
Actually, I'm very slow and very methodical. And I do.
Well, the books are piling up, so whatever it is you're doing is working.
I normally only do one a year. The first thing is their historical military fiction. I research, And that's one of the things that a lot of my readers are veterans, and
Yeah.
that's quite often when I get a review that they say they appreciate the accuracy of the weaponry, the soldiers' uniforms, the things they carried, to use an O'Brien term.
Yeah.
The reality of, and frankly, it wasn't a big stretch for me. I trained extensively for a solid year, thinking I was still going to go.
Right.
And matter of fact, my buddies, they were relentless. They called me the most highly trained cherry they ever knew. And yeah, it's wait. You know all the equipment, you know all the tactics. You've been there, you've trained for it. Tiger Ridge at Fort Polk, extremely realistic jungle style training. And after you've tripped a few of those artillery simulators, you were essentially, they put a red tag on you, say you're dead. Thank God it was just an artillery simulator, but your ears are ringing, you can't hear them.
Yeah.
You kind of know, you got a feeling for what it was like probably to trip a booby trap for real, except you didn't get perforated with shrapnel. It's
No, I do love. I know. But I love that though. I mean, I also write historical fiction, and I obsessively research. So I love that discipline. But it does slow you down because it takes time to get all of that and get it right. And so I definitely I appreciate that. I had written a story about nuclear weapons manufacturing in Colorado at this facility called Rocky Flats. And this one of my friends' dads had read the story and he's like, "So when did you work in that industry?" And I'm like, "I never have. That facility closed when I was 3 years old in 1991." And he's kind of like, "How did you know all that?" I'm like, "I am autistic and have an internet connection. I read obsessively." Like, yes, I did look up to find out what exact kind of welding that they use in nuclear manufacturing. And I learned all about all the different types of welding and what chemicals. Fortunately, I also used to work at an auto shop, so I did know something about welding. In fact, I actually had welded my own exhaust one time under the careful management of my master mechanic German boss. But, I was like, no, I just research. I just read extensively and made sure that I had the manufacturing process for a W-88 nuclear warhead that usually goes in a missile down to its exact components. No one from Iran read my book. Yes, and no, but I love that level of research and getting it right in every tiny detail and all this type of thing. That's very good.
Well, a lot of folks will ask me too, how did you actually know what the weather was like? I said, well, we did training exercises in places like Panama. And I can tell you, Panama is a whole lot like Vietnam.
Absolutely.
And you know exactly what you're dealing with as far as leeches, mosquitoes, snakes, monsoon rains, all of that. Very real. I've sat in a foxhole with water up to here, muddy water. You got a poncho on, but it's floating on top of the water. So I know the feeling, But
Yes.
yeah, there's a line that these guys crossed. They call it, looking the beast in the eye, and it's very real. And I've heard them talk about it, and that's where your writers, what would you call it? Your writer's ability comes into play. You've got to try to recount the things they're saying. Matter of fact, a lot of the things they would talk about, but I actually heard it myself, were bullets cracking past their ears. Well, I actually heard that a whole lot. And things of that nature. They talk about a mortar round going off, but they would be in the hole where they wouldn't catch any shrapnel, but the concussion would get them and they couldn't hear. Well, I've actually had that with those artillery simulators. They were supposed to be buried in the ground, but at least one of them got me. Was the pin from the tripwire didn't come out. It pulled the artillery simulator out of the ground, and I'm sitting there kicking it off my foot when it goes off. So that was a fun thing.
Not never, never. No, that's quite yeah. There's all one of the things I love about that level of detail in writing is how much how it's those small details that make it very realistic. And you have to be careful with them because you can make it too much and it becomes very tedious for the reader.
Amen.
But picking the right ones that really add that just extra teaspoon of realism, that's what makes for great, absolutely great writing.
I don't know if you were going to go here, but when you talk about that, I have read, so many authors, and even some well-known authors who are well thought of get off in the weeds with
Oh, yes.
pages and pages of ridiculous detail. And I found one. He doesn't even write in a genre I really care for, but the guy is just freakishly good. James Lee Burke. He writes detective or private eye novels in take place in southern Louisiana, New Orleans, and all the way across, in Bayou country. That man will start telling his story, and he's telling his story, and the whole time you don't realize it, he's painting a picture. You see the Spanish moss hanging from the trees, and he's still telling his story, and you see the misty rain falling that morning and dripping from the cypress trees. You see the gator slithering off the bank into the water. And he never stops writing his story the whole time. And that's I think that is the one thing that I get a lot of positive feedback from readers and their reviews is the realism of without stopping the story. And I think that's the key.
No, I mean you do have to strike that balance and keep things moving along while while also providing important bits of detail along the way. I was having a discussion with a friend the other day. It's a very hard thing to balance out. And it's a very it definitely you have to pick what you're going to stick with, very carefully. But if you get it right, it makes for very powerful writing. And I had an experience. I completed my MFA a couple years ago, and my project I worked on in that program, I unfortunately for a year had an advisor who was a Cuban man from South Florida and who'd never seen Gone with the Wind, and I was writing Downton Abbey set in the antebellum South. And so he's asking for every little tiny detail that I'm kind of like, literally, if you go watch Gone with the Wind, you will not have 90% of these questions. Like I've got out my 1851 cookbook to describe every single dish, every morsel of food, every bit of, because he has no mind conception of the South in 1850. And so I switch advisors at one point, and the next lady comes along who actually does have a cultural consciousness of the antebellum South, and she's like, there's an excess amount of description. Half of this needs to go. And I said, yeah, I've spent the last year stuffing more in, unnecessarily, in my opinion, to please someone who just doesn't have anything in his head, nothing culturally to draw from, sort of thing about this. And she's like, yeah, you were not necessarily well served on that. And I'm kind of like, oh, I know. So it's, yeah, that's the challenge with it right now, is picking out what details are interesting and what details are not.
I think you nailed it when you said,
and making things a little bit more stark than they are. Right now it's a little overdone, but
yeah, I think you nailed it when you said find that one little key element. I'm sure you said teaspoon, and that's exactly what you have to do. And that's what a lot of people say. or I've had said several times, is no one else would know about that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
the one little
No.
detail that they bought in.
And that's what it really takes, is that little detail that makes it very, very real. And in order for it to work, there can't be too much of it, which is which is
Yeah,
always a fascinating thing, and a hard balance to strike. And I think what for me is always exciting is when people kind of light up about it and they're telling you about it and you're like, oh yeah, that's when this, became really real for you, sort of thing. That's always a cool moment to hear about and everything. So yeah. So let's keep talking about process though. So are you a do you outline? Do you just write it out? How do you go?
that's a good question, Cameron. In the beginning, um, when I started writing, I just wrote freehand. Whatever came to mind is what came out on the paper.
Mm,
And it's more or less stayed with me. Actually, though, as I get older, I will say, okay, I've got to establish my ending first because I have written two or three novels that have never seen the light of day because I didn't know how they were going to end. And they just kind of went off in la la land and disappeared and
yeah.
just didn't work as a story. So, yeah, I had a really great mentor. I wouldn't know if you'd call her a mentor, but we were pretty close. She was an English professor at the University of Nebraska, and she used to do their writers' conference up there every year. Her name was Janice Agee, and
Ooh, ooh.
Janice, she didn't take ownership of the term. I think she had heard it somewhere else, but she hammered it home quite often: is let your characters tell the story. You know, be detailed on who your characters are, what their emotions are, what their feelings are. Not necessarily all out on the page, but know what they are. And let them tell the story. And then write your story, she said, in this manner. Think of yourself as you're driving across the United States at night in your car. And she said, as far as you can see is the end of your headlights. She said, write your story that way and let your characters react and tell you what happens next. And I've done that somewhat now. I mean, I did it for years with most everything I wrote, but now I do tend to slightly outline somewhat, not a lot. I'll say, well, in this chapter, I want them to do this, in this chapter. And a lot of times, what I'll end up is plugging additional chapters in or changing it, say, no, I don't want that to happen and go off in this direction or something like that.
No, no. I mean of all the people I've had on this show, that's the most common. I am the opposite, which is why I always ask because I'm always fascinated by what people say. I'm the opposite. I plan obsessively. And
Yeah.
in fact, when I teach writing, I teach outlining and even storyboarding. I plan obsessively. Nothing happens because the way my brain works, if I don't plan it out in advance, when it comes time to write the prose, I won't know what to do. Nothing, brain broken, nothing comes out. Whereas if I can look and say, okay, we're doing this, and we're going to write this scene, all this type of thing, then things move much more quickly.
That
So,
has been a problem for me.
yeah,
I'll run into dead ends. Whereas if I had done what you said, I could
yeah.
probably tell my story more effectively or faster.
No, my first novel, I had that problem too. Just a lot of years of dead ends before I finally was like, okay, what's the actual story we're trying to tell? Where are we coming from? Where are we going? Sort of thing. And that's when I got absolutely addicted to outlining and planning in advance. But don't feel bad, you're in the majority. So
I'm not sure that's always the best thing, but okay.
yeah, yeah. Let's also talk about cover logistics and everything. How do you come together for your imagery and your cover and your branding and all that sort of thing?
It's been very slow going.
Hmm.
I actually, did very little of any of that in the beginning. I probably wrote Melody Hill, Gomorrah, and Rayford's MVP before I actually ever thought about doing much of anything as far as marketing or branding or anything of that nature. And then I realized that they were just sitting there dead in the water on Amazon and not doing much. And actually, up till just probably a year or two ago, all I ever did was run a few Amazon ads, period. Now, I did go and I got invited up to places like Johnson invited me up to do a little talk up there at the Nebraska conference one year, and I got the same thing down in, I don't remember who that was, in Florida. And then my professor there, the one that got me writing at University of Alabama, had me come back and talk to a creative writing class. So outside of that, I mean, I've done a few book signings, but I haven't done much marketing. Now, I've actually this latest novel that's coming out next. I'm co-authoring it. I'm the lead on the writing and the story. The other person was a lieutenant in Vietnam. He was a psychological operations officer in Saigon, and that's all he did. And he contacted me and said, I've read a lot of different authors, and I was wondering if you would help me with mine. And he said, I'd like you to co-author it with me. And first I said no. And but then I got to feeling guilty. I mean, this guy needs help. I said, well, just send me your manuscript and I'll help you with it, a little bit. But you can write it. Well, when I got the manuscript, I realized it needed a lot of work, and I really didn't want to spend the rest of my life coaching and training like you do. It can be very time-consuming and a tough task. Matter of fact, I admire and appreciate folks like you who will take the time to do it. I've done a few of those. I don't have the patience. I guess you would say I'm a type A, and I just want to write. I want to write, and everything else is a distraction. That's why I've never marketed. And well, it just so happens this guy is a primo marketer. He's the one he said, do podcasts, do this, do that. And I said, do I really want to do that? And he said, yes, you do.
Yeah.
So here I am.
No. I mean, I took it to the other extreme. I built an entire platform to market my own writing. So there you go. So it's a difficult it is a difficult thing, and I feel you on that. Sometimes I had an appearance this week for a lovely podcast in Nigeria, and I had to do it at 11 o'clock at night because of time zones, and it was difficult to be kind of like, I don't want to get dressed and put makeup on at 10:45 at night. Like, no. But it was really good. We had a great conversation. It's one of those you complain about the entire time until you show up, and then you show up and it's great and it's fine and you love it and it's wonderful. And it was really great. We had a really great conversation. And I always love doing international stuff because they ask tons and tons of interesting questions, and their enthusiasm is always fantastic. And you get enthusiasm you never get when you appear in America and sort of thing. And so, it is, there is definitely two sides to the writing life. There is the writing and there is the marketing end of things. I'm trying to rebalance right now towards the writing end of things. Part of the problem is, we produced a book for a client this year about not losing, whose author actually was a doctor in Vietnam at a hospital in Thailand, which is fun. And then I have a book coming out, and we have another person in our hybrid program at Soup who has a book coming out. So I have not had a ton of time to write. So when you, like, your wisdom about avoiding some of this is very apt, because I haven't really worked on new fiction or anything in a hot minute. Because of being kind of stuck in other people's projects. So I'm trying to rebalance as well, because I have several, I would say, like, sort of half done things that either have problems and I need to sit down and fix them. Or in the case of one, I just need to sit down and finish it. There's no problem. Just finish it, sort of thing. So, it is definitely, I would say, in any writing community, any group, you always have that difficulty of balancing writing versus marketing, and especially, a lot of us can't afford to be right full time. That's not hardly a viable business model anymore. So we're also usually working as something else. And so it is definitely hard to find the time, space, and energy to do all of it, sort of thing. So,
I was amazed at what you have done. I went through your website
oh yeah, oh thank you very much.
prepped and looked at. Oh my heavens! I was like, how does this man? When does he sleep?
You know what? Lately, like I didn't. I know very seriously, I didn't for a very long time, and in the last couple years, I've gotten myself into a very nasty case of post-COVID fatigue slash burnout, and so
Mm.
I finally have slept, and also getting nearer to 40 than not, and it's starting to show. The I mean, when I was 25, I would work all day, go to the gym, keep up a 4 day a week gym schedule, go out at night, host an event, go to bars afterwards, get up and do it all over again. That is not even possible anymore. I'm like, I could do one of those things now. Pick one of those things. And so, but unfortunately for me, I got really used to that cadence and pace of life where it's like if I was awake, I was doing 50 things at once. And that all kind of came to a grinding, screeching halt a couple years ago. And and so yeah, so there's definitely been a lot of rebalancing. Things are going to take a lot longer. Some stuff has to get let go, sort of thing. It just all the priorities have to shift because I'm used to doing it all, and the body just won't do it anymore. And I find that endlessly frustrating, but I have to live with it. So,
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that I think the medical community has now figured out that they've really pushed the importance of exercise, and it is it's important. Okay,
yeah,
I agree
yeah,
100%. But sleep is almost equally as important, and they've started to
yes.
figure that out. Uh, these folks that brag about, oh, I only have 2 hours of sleep a night. Yeah, well, I can tell.
No, 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 very seriously. I mean, for a long time, I lived on 5 hours of sleep. I mean, the first time I went to grad school, I was in grad school full time. I was running my first magazine full time. And I also was literally running a party house. Like, literally, the party was at my house, sort of thing. And I slept for maybe 3 or 4 hours a night for about 2.5 years, sort of
Yeah,
thing. I mean, I didn't even start prioritizing sleep in my life till I was in my early 30s. Like that was just the pace of life that I was used to going and moving at. And my brain would still love to move at that pace. The body is like, oh no, 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 no. That's no longer a thing.
yeah.
And so, no, sleep, rest, and recharging is absolutely important. And what's I think amazing now is we found out every major chemical that controls how things work, hormones, thyroid, blood pressure, all the big major stuff, that all gets fixed during sleep. And if you're not getting enough sleep, everything else is screwed up. And
Amen.
yeah, and it's so as someone who, was like, oh, hell yeah, yeah, it's like, if you don't bother sleeping him, the Red Bull type of situation and lifestyle. And quite frankly, enabled by a lot of vets from Iraq and Afghanistan who were the same attitude. We're like, we don't need sleep, we'll just buy another case of Monster, sort of thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
that definitely was definitely, I mean, learned the hard way that you don't eventually that sleep debt, that sleep bill has to be paid, and it's going to manifest in ways that are extremely unpleasant.
so
And
very
it's
true.
yeah, it's actually quite important. So it's yeah, it's a very difficult very difficult thing. I thought you were about to say something. I didn't have a question for you. I'm so sorry. Um, but we're coming close to the top of the hour. Thank you for visiting CameronJoel.com. I wanted to ask the kind of as a final question. This is the part of the show where we do plugs. So why don't you let us know where we can keep up with you on social media, where we can find you online, and where we can buy your many books.
As I said, I've never or marketed very much at all, so I'm kind of behind the curve. Like all the aging people, I'll say it just to be nice, referring to myself. The only I think it's Facebook and Instagram. I don't think I have any other. I don't do X or any of these others. I mean, I'm on them, but I don't do them. LinkedIn, I don't do that.
Yeah.
I do have a website, and I do try to put out a newsletter. In theory, it was going to be once a month. It's not quite hit that goal yet. But you can look at all my books and my blogs, or I call them blog, newsletter, whatever, at www.rickdestefanis.com. All the books are on Amazon right now, although I'm currently considering going wide with my Western series. I do a historical Western saga called the Rawlins Saga, which begins at the end of the American Civil War, or near the end of the American Civil War in 1864, and takes you out on the Oregon Trail. And instead of going all the way to California, they turn north and go into Montana. That's an interesting story, too. They go to Paradise Valley, and someone picked up my book, the first Rawlins book, and read it and said, this is a knockoff of Yellowstone. And, of course, you don't respond.
Yeah.
Why bother? But only problem was my book was written at least 2 years before Yellowstone ever came out. But the similarities are so uncanny, striking.
I get that. That happened to me once. There was a movie with Meryl Streep and Julia Roberts called August Osage County that had come out, and I'd gone to a conference to pitch agents on a novel about my grandmother's life called A Plains Girl that takes place in eastern Colorado on a farm. And I about broke down in tears when I do my 90-second, well, not quite 90 second, maybe 45-second pitch. And the guy doesn't even look up from his phone and just says, "Congratulations, you wrote August Osage County next." And I almost burst out. I almost burst out in tears to be kind of like, yeah, I realize that movie just came out, but I've been working on this for 3 years before that movie came out, and it's not done, so it'll come out well afterwards. But yes, that's how people definitely are. But well, excellent. Well, if people want to keep up with you, then they can head over to your website. We'll link it in the description and everything. So yeah, this has been a delightful conversation. So thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you for what you do, Cameron. It means a lot.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.